Okay, we have 10 minutes for questions. If you don't have any, I'll make some up.
Good thing nobody wants to use the microphone, so I get to say things. I thought I would just bring up the subject of EMF for the Google people, because I didn't know if you knew that there are people called building biologists that do measurement in private homes and businesses for EMF exposure, and that's sort of the cutting edge of making people really happy in a building because you can't see it, you don't think of it, and once you put the wiring in and haven't done conduit or have transformers in the wrong place, it can make people feel unwell, and you may not be able to discover the issue. So I would recommend, communicating with people about it.
Yeah, we're actually doing a couple pilots on that right now, where we're trying to measure it and determine what best practices might be.
And Wi-Fi, industrial Wi-Fi for like schools is apparently much worse than private Wi-Fi in the home. And
We probably have more Wi-Fi than anyone else. So,
yeah.
yeah.
But France has outlawed Wi-Fi in schools, I believe, and that was like last month. And so Wi-Fi, I deal with patients who are sensitive to Wi-Fi, so I can't have Wi-Fi in my building that I'm creating. Everything's hardwired, and that's what the American Academy of Environmental Medicine wrote a policy actually on their website for Los Angeles school system or something, that we suggest that hardwiring in schools is advised for children who are having cardiac issues and a lot of actually concrete problems due to Wi-Fi.
Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Bressler again. I'm involved with following some of the challenges of nanotechnology, and one of the issues that I'm focusing on and trying to address is worker contact with nanomaterials through the life cycle of a product. And one of the huge challenges that we have, I'm in an agency that does demilitarization, is when you take apart a product, you don't necessarily know what was in it. So in terms of the dusts and other products that are emanating as you decommission something, and in part it comes down to labeling. How do you label a product that's in use so that you have the equivalent of a material safety data sheet for something that's been used for 10 or 20 years? So I'm just throwing this out as a challenge that I'm trying to address, and any thoughts that you might have for the materials going into buildings and to know downstream at the end of their life cycle how to handle them and how to make sure they're handled appropriately for all persons.
Yeah, it's a great question, and nanotechnology is something that I'm not positioned to make a judgment on, but we're concerned that we don't really understand the health, or at least at Google, I'm concerned that we don't understand all the health implications of nanotechnology, and that it's become very, very ubiquitous, and it's in many building products. So as part of, I'd mentioned that we're really asking for transparency and trying to understand what is in products, and that's one of the questions we ask is, does this product contain any nanomaterials? And we try to avoid that whenever possible. And then I know Bill's back there. Bill, does the HPD cover nano? Does it ask about nanotechnology? Yes. That's what I thought. Yeah, so the HPD will help us do that in a standard way where we can get reporting from manufacturers about whether or not their products contain nanomaterials or nanomaterial components.
I'm not following the acronym, HPD?
Sorry, the Health Product Declaration. Apologies.
Okay.
So
does that go into a database so it's followed with the material downstream?
not yet. It's new. It's just released this fall, and it's the first open standard around reporting material ingredients.
And that just to build on that, Google has provided some support through a charitable support to USGBC to focus on building better credits around that kind of materials transparency. And a big piece of that is how the Health Performance Directive works in terms of providing additional dimensions to what we know about materials in terms of across their entire life cycle. So the very first, we definitely as a building block of understand that kind of transparency is the prerequisite to moving forward. So having nano considered in HPDs is a big deal, actually.
Carl?
So my question has to do with balancing the biophilia, the sense of well-being with people and so forth, with open, not just big windows, but glass walls and visual connections between areas and inside and outside with energy conservation. When I look at net zero houses and passive houses, what's remarkable about them is the lack of windows. So what kind of thinking, and this could go to the previous presentation too, what kind of thinking are you guys using to kind of balance those? How do you get the maximum practical energy savings and conservation and at the same time make a very attractive, livable building?
So I would say there's definitely a difference in percent window-to-wall ratio percent glazing that you see in the buildings targeting net zero energy performance, but it wouldn't be zero. So it's not a complete lack of windows. Usually they're optimizing their use of daylight so they can reduce electric lighting. They're very careful about how that envelope is constructed, what facades they're putting glass on, but they're, the living buildings in particular are also concerned with access to views and making sure that the environments are very livable and you're providing those connections to the exterior. So I don't know if that fully answered, but.
Mel, I'll just build on what Kate was saying. I think there's two answers from a LEED-centric perspective. One is there's two ways you set priorities. One is if you look at the point allocation in LEED, you can say, well, LEED itself is taking an opinion, and it basically says, actually, if you look at it in detail, it basically says the two things that matter are energy and indoor environmental quality in aggregate, and transportation is a part of that. So those are the big things that matter. But I think what we're evolving to is saying that's just kind of USGBC's opinion through the rating system as to what those priorities are. I think the sophisticated users, I think it goes back to a comment that was said earlier, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. I think it's actually a Biden quote or something. But the issue is which may not be a good thing. But the issue there, where I think that's very powerful, is saying, from my perspective, if I was working on something like a schools project, I would hope that the values in play would put the indoor experience and the health and well-being absolutely first, and maxing out that opportunity, and then coming in and saying, within that context, I'm now going to work on energy. There may be other situations, like a data center, where I might say, I'm going to work on energy and I'm going to have only an afterthought on this other thing. So I think it needs to be flexible because it's situational and context dependent, and I don't think it can be prescribed in some sort of top-down.
And just one more thing. While very often there's both synergies and conflicts between indoor environmental quality and excellent experience and energy efficiency. They don't always go hand in hand, but there certainly are times where they do. So, really maximizing those times where they go hand in hand, maximizing the experience and the health, while then, doing what you can to optimize energy as a secondary, I think makes a lot of sense.
And kind of a quick follow-up to that. A lot of conversation is about buildings, commercial buildings, workplaces. Are any of you involved at all with residential, maybe even multi-residence, big apartment buildings and that sort of thing? And that same kind of question of balance, because there, unlike a data center, we got all the servers and so forth, and you don't have very many people, and the servers don't need daylight, okay? Homes, I think, would be even more important for putting their experience first and then optimizing the energy. I really like that shift, by the way, because right now it's kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so, well, I've got other questions.
We could probably.
You'll have another opportunity.
We can follow up afterwards, Carl. But this is, the quick answer is yes. I actually think that if you look at the data on homes, whether they're multifamily or single family, they're a little. I still find them a little bit weird. But it basically says what people care about is energy cost reduction, indoor air quality. If you had to look for empirical data on what people are buying when they buy a green home, they're buying those two things. I actually think I would expect people to buy a broader suite of indoor environmental quality things, but it's really hard to find data to support that at scale.
Matt?
So it's always super exciting to see these, examples of cutting edge, metric frameworks, and then obviously, Robin McKinnon and I would dream of having a laboratory like Google's to look at nudging and healthy eating behaviors and stuff. How can we in the public health world, what kinds of help do you guys need to, A, evaluate what you're doing, and then also, how do we get insights you're gleaning out for broader use going forward?
Good question. So since I did ask for help, couldn't have planted a better question. So we have I sit alongside our food folks, our global food folks, and what's now called our health and performance team, which includes our fitness folks and our massage team. We have about our real estate we're called Real Estate and Workplace Services. We're about 270 full-time employees. About 60 of those are massage therapists. Believe it or not, they're the largest contingent among us. So anyway, they're organized around health and performance, and then our nutrition team. And their model is really around 4 pillars, which is mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. And so we work with them a lot during programming, as well as they're thinking a lot in terms of the services that they provide, about how can we maximize opportunities for all 4 of those pillars, and for the behaviors that we'd like to encourage amongst our employees that we think will improve their well-being, both in the short term and in the long term. We get, all of us get asked by our leadership to think about things like, how could we increase the lifespan of our employees by 30 years? That's not common in a real estate organization. So I feel really lucky to be able to be asked to think about that. And I think all of those folks are really looking for evidence-based ways to encourage those behaviors, and what are the right behaviors that we'd like to encourage, and new ways to do that. So we're certainly open to that and models to make that effective. I think the BJ Fogg model of how can we give people triggers to take actions, and how can we reduce resistance to help people actually take those actions. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that model. That's kind of a neat one if you want to check that out. And then on the building side, it's really what we've been talking about today. How can we really integrate that to reach those outcomes and be thinking as one team about how best to do this? And we're not quite there yet, I guess. I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Okay, we need to stop and move on to the next. You'll have another chance. Trust me, we're changing things for the last session. Yeah, I'm gonna let everybody go, don't worry. But I have to tell you one thing that he did not tell you that Google lets people do: bring your dogs to work. That's a very healthy attitude.
Can I add one other quick thing really
yes,
quickly?
yes,
Sorry,
yes.
I just realized this is important too. A lot of times when we talk to researchers, their conclusions are, well, we found this and we need to do more research. And you've oftentimes found much more than that. And all we need are those testable hypotheses. And my opinion is that as an owner, it's my responsibility that if we have a hypothesis, that we need to test it, we need to implement against it. And that burying our head in the sand and saying, oh, that sounds risky, or if we admit that this negative outcome is a possibility, then we're taking on liability. I think that is just dead wrong. And anytime that we have an opportunity to try something, to have a hypothesis that we think can positively impact our people, we want to act on that, and at least try it and see if it works. So I think that's something that's important. And measure it, absolutely, and get feedback from it.
Okay. The next